Let me go ahead and hit that quick. Great. Okay, so welcome everyone. I think we're good to get started. If folks are rolling a little bit late, that's all right. But my name is Justin Nordeste. I'm Senior Product Manager with the product team here at Replicated. With me helping monitor the chat and moderating the discussion is John Quill Williams. John Quill works with our products documentation group. Today I'm going to be covering some details around our current alpha and beta feature list, and in general, how you can go ahead and join the alpha beta program that Replicated has. Just to mention, since I'm recording this recording is going to be available. All the sessions are recorded, so definitely encourage folks to go and explore those assets afterwards. Also, embedded in this deck, and we'll kind of see this as I'm going through, are just some helpful links. So my email address is here. My LinkedIn is also here. If there are certain features that you find interesting, there are links throughout the presentation that go into much deeper detail. We're going to kind of run the gamut of some of the key features that are available today. So after we run through and kind of do a brief overview on those different features, we'll also run into joining the beta program. I will mention as well that, this is a fairly comprehensive list, but it's not fully comprehensive. We do have a lot of features that are out here, in alpha and beta phases. We really tried to cater this list to the ones that we thought were the most impactful and the ones that were the most interesting. Obviously, definitely want to encourage folks to try these out. As always, we're looking for feedback, which will kind of segue well into my next slide. So why alpha or beta? Replicated, one of the things that I've loved about working here for the last 13 months is that we're constantly iterating as an organization, as a group. And this is week to week. We do try to release very aggressively, iterate as much as we can within the product. And really, the whole point of this fast-paced cycle is to provide as much value as we can to our vendors as quickly as possible. That could be direct value to them, in terms of their development cycles or packaging their app, or it could be value that can be passed down onto their customers as well. So some of these solutions, they start out more experimental, and that's usually the ones that we'll flag as alpha. These usually have to, be introduced to folks before we allow them to use them. While some other features that may jump right into beta might even be documented. We'll talk about some of those today that are flagged for beta, but are essentially out there in the wild for folks, and they can feel free to test them at their own will. Ultimately, though, outside of kind of the technical reason for why we alpha and beta, which I'm sure folks are very familiar with, this also helps us prove out a feature in terms of market feasibility. So every time we add a new capability or a new feature, this increases the learning curve of the product, the complexity of the product, which can make it more difficult for us to support. It also provides a wider surface area for the product. So we always want to make sure that, yes, try to catch bugs as we can, try to make sure that the feature works as intended, but we also want to make sure that features are interesting enough and, something that, folks, want us and want themselves to actually have to incur some of those costs as well before we bring them, to GA and put them general availability in the product. So we're not going to spend too much time on this slide because we're going to go into each feature in particular. The one thing that I did want to highlight here, though, just going back to my earlier call out, if y'all do happen to download this deck after the fact, these will just link to the specific slides. So, if you're tagging down that headline or something like that, this can be a great way just to go back to reference these and to get to some of the links that are within the presentation. So I just thought that would make things a little bit easier to navigate for everybody. And we'll jump into the alpha features. So the first feature that we're going to talk about today is our consolidated application license. Essentially, what this allows you as the vendor to do is assign one or more applications from vendor portal to your customer in vendor portal. And really what this means is that instead of your customer having to go and download multiple licenses from each of the download portals for your apps, or if you're providing those licenses, you have to go and download them for them and then email them or distribute them how you would. Essentially, this consolidates everything into a single license file. So the goal here, first for our vendors is to help simplify that process of, bundling or distributing more than one application to their customer and making that a little bit easier. And also for the customer, it makes it easier for them where they don't have to worry about keeping track of multiple files or uploading multiple files or anything like that. They essentially get to choose from the available apps in that license which ones they want to deploy in their app manager instance. Part of the reason why I'm very excited about this one is this is one of our first steps that the team's starting to take to better enable vendors to deliver multiple applications. In a former life, I used to work as a sales engineer, and we were always encouraged and thought to think about not selling point solutions and focusing on dealing with the myriad of problems that a customer might have. Having said that, there's other use cases as well. There may be certain paid-for features or additional add-on components. All these to me just seem like really great ways as a vendor to go to market and to help really partner with your customers for success. In the longer term, I really hope this is an area that Replicated can help build for our vendors, presuming, of course, that our vendors need it, like I mentioned before. Again, one of the reasons why we chose this as kind of our first to highlight here. Moving along, I'll cover this one pretty briefly because this is the direct CLI Helm install that Mark Campbell's giving a full presentation on right now in one of the other breakout rooms. I would encourage that if folks, did find this is something that they were interested in, to also watch that recording as well. But essentially, this is, adding a third install option to the way that you can distribute your app with Replicated. The first being installing into an existing cluster, the second being via Kubernetes installer into an embedded cluster. And now this is the third, which is essentially installing via a Helm CLI command. So really, our motivation here is we found from some of our vendors, and we do already support Helm in GA, and we've been helping folks deliver their Helm applications. But Helm's starting to grow in popularity, and some customers are essentially requiring or using Helm to track the different applications that are installed in their environment. So this can help make sure that for those customers that are very stringent and really require that Helm usage, that your app deployment to them can also align with this while still retaining some of the benefits of Replicated. Next up is our ability to directly send support bundles. So this is something where, again, a lot of value, and I also used to work in support, and I can tell you that nobody ever calls when they're happy. And usually the one thing that they hate hearing is, oh, hey, can you generate this bundle and send it to me? But out of the gate, we provide the ability for redaction and support bundle gathering within Application Manager. And essentially this feature, it's only for customers who have, the required internet activity. But once they generate that bundle via Application Manager, it will automatically upload, to your view in the vendor portal, to the vendor's view in the vendor portal. So really, there's several things that we're solving with this, right? It makes it easier for the customer to get the log bundle to you. They don't have to worry about where they're sending it to, or if they're FTPing it, or who's collecting it. Essentially, your team can go and view it on vendor portal, or if you'd prefer to, pull it down, you can download it from there as well. This kind of takes away some of that friction and makes that that whole process a little bit easier for you and your customers. To me, this also, seems to save time where, again, when folks are calling support, they're never in a great mood. Sometimes those escalations can be critical. So having to figure out and take the time to, not only wait for the bundle, but then also to figure out where to upload it before folks start taking a look is a bit cumbersome. So I think this is a really great way to help, reduce some of that pain, reduce some of that friction, and deliver value to the customers. Next up is managing secrets with GitOps. So this is in particular for those vendors that have customers that opt into using our GitOps functionality with Application Manager. And basically what this feature does is provides an integration with sealed secrets. So before App Manager commits any new versions to Git, you can enable the option to essentially encrypt those secrets within the app, so that folks know that there's that added security, that added confidence, that added obfuscation before new releases are committed to a Git repository. And security is usually one of our highest things that we're concerned about here at Replicated. So definitely a prime importance for us. Next up is including a Kubernetes installer in your release. Amber had alluded to this in her presentation, but essentially what this does is, we've always kind of had these two atomic units to really help kind of influence, what's available to your customers. There's your application that you're creating and bundling and distributing. And then there's the Kubernetes installer, which essentially is for the customers that don't have that existing cluster and, they need one provided for them. These two items were separate, though pretty closely coupled. And essentially that's what we're doing with this feature is we're bringing these two items to be managed as part of your release. So essentially what this lets you do is create a Kubernetes spec that is bundled with your application. This can make it easier for you to know, which install command was ran when the cluster was deployed, instead of having to go search for it or figure out which one your customer might have used. But it also is going to enable us to, down the line, take some additional steps. Like, for example, we're planning to create a pre-flight check that can warn or require customers to upgrade their Kubernetes installer installation before they actually deploy an application. And the idea here is really just to provide more control and more control for your customers, as well as more control for yourselves. So we have a few vendors that are actually already using this in their testing process. And in particular, again, it's just to make sure that they know, which components are there. So we're really excited about this one. We think that this is something that a lot of folks are probably going to adopt, but again, always want to make sure that we're continuing to encourage. So our last alpha feature here is KURL support for IPv6. So essentially, this one's pretty basic, but we all know that some organizations have already adopted IPv6, or they're always trying to have that forward-thinking nature to make sure that maybe newer solutions that they're adopting are able to run in IPv6 environment. And this just means that our Kubernetes installer supports IPv6, so it can be installed in those environments where IPv6 may be used. Not really a whole lot extra to say on that one, but I think that one's pretty straightforward. So moving on to our beta features, like I kind of alluded to before, these are the features that are a little bit more baked, a little bit more out there in the wild. Usually our documentation is a little bit more robust on this, but again, not exactly out there in prime time quite yet to the GA audience. And the first is our identity service. So essentially, what this, there's kind of two parts to this feature. The first is that it allows your enterprise customer to leverage their existing identity provider for logging into App Manager. So there's several benefits of this. The first is no more shared password for App Manager. So essentially, when a user's logging in, it's just like any of their other, IDP gated apps where they're using the credentials that they know and love, and we're kind of deferring to that IDP for authorization. But the other benefit here as well is, this offloads all of the password complexity requirements or password rotation requirements and things like that to the identity provider as well. So not only do you get that benefit of users having that familiar login, but also now you don't have to worry about having that area where essentially they might have to manually or be reminded to have a complex password or change the password or things like that. The second portion of this feature actually allows you, the vendor, if you choose to essentially ingest those IDP settings from App Manager and then use them within your application. So something where if you already have those constructs available in your application, if you can work with an IDP, then essentially you can take those settings and pass them into your app. This way, it's one less thing that your user has to configure a second time. I will mention that currently we only support OpenID Connect compliant identity providers. So that's definitely one of those areas that we're interested in as well, in terms of is that enough, or maybe we have to also add support for LDAP, for example. Could be a direction we go there, but something that's very, very interesting, and at least from my experience, can definitely be one of those things that enterprises know and expect within a product. Moving on to pin and minimum COTS version in a release. Essentially, this beta allows you to specify a minimum version of App Manager in the new release of your application. So there's kind of, again, two aspects of this. We're trying to solve as many problems as we can. But the first, though, is folks might not remember or might forget to update Application Manager. So this can be problematic. We're regularly addressing CVEs and things like that, and bugs in new versions of App Manager. But more importantly, we're also adding new features that our vendors are using and might be taking advantage of. So this can help you make sure as the vendor, hey, if I want to start leveraging a new App Manager feature, or if I want to make sure that my customers are staying current in upgrading App Manager and possibly their embedded clusters, then you can leverage this feature to make sure that folks are staying current with the latest and greatest. Next up is our beta for RKE2 and K3s add-ons. So this was alluded to also in Amber's presentation around kind of our future goal of having a single node optimized spec. One thing that I will just say kind of off to the side is, this is one of those areas where, to me, verdict's out on if we're going to end up moving forward with RKE2 or K3s or both. Very well could be all those. But also we've seen several vendors who have been essentially creating their own single node optimized, for lack of a better, based on essentially setting a small amount or a very slim amount of add-ons that we already already offer through our open source KURL project. So really the motivation around this is pretty wide. There's a lot of use cases. Some could be the skeptical or resource strapped enterprise who really just needs something that's sturdy enough that they can deploy inside of their environment. Another could be for internal testing or labs or demo environments or proof of value installations and things like that. In particular, one of the things that I expect to hear from our vendors around this one is that particularly for like POV, if they were to go the single node optimized route, that they would likely, expect to pivot that into a production installation. Back when I was working with customers a lot, it was very, very often that we would take a proof of value environment and essentially pivot it into production instead of having to, start from scratch. So these are really some, interesting areas. Again, verdict's kind of out. Definitely interested in feedback on this one. And like I had alluded to before, the RKE2 and K3s add-ons are out there and documented. So this is one of those features that, sorry, excuse me, is out there and available in the wild today. So, no permissions needed. Essentially, you can go to KURL.sh and check those out. Next up is our vendor license agreement for KURL. Essentially, what this does is it allows a vendor to specify a text file that will be displayed to the user when they're installing or upgrading their Kubernetes installer embedded clusters. So really the motivation behind this, my peer had actually implemented it, one of my peers on the product management team, and the vendor that he was working very closely with really wanted to make sure that they were covered legally from that first point of, hey, something is going into my customer's environment. So essentially the way this feature works is, you, the vendor, specify that raw text file. And when the user goes to run that curl command, the first step that the Kubernetes installer is going to do is go and fetch that text file, render it inside the user's shell, and then require them to either, yes or no, agree or decline. If they decline, everything stops. If they agree, then the Kubernetes installer continue about his business. So one gap right now, in particular with this beta, is that we're currently only supporting, internet connected clusters. So we're not supporting air-gapped clusters quite yet. Having said that, though, something that's definitely on our radar as an area that we think, could help drive further adoption and more interest. But again, want to make sure we hear that from our vendors. Okay, so last feature for our beta is our AWS add-on for curl. I'm actually quite proud of this because the team that I work with had brought this forward. Again, this is another feature that is documented on curl.sh. So this is out there and available. Definitely encourage folks to go and take a look at it. But essentially, what this allows the Kubernetes installer to do is to configure the Kubernetes control plane to use or to have AWS specified as its cloud provider. So Kubernetes actually puts out under kubernetes.io a Kubernetes AWS cloud provider set of software, which is essentially what we're loading up here and enabling in kubeadm. And this integration essentially allows the Kubernetes cluster itself to reach out to Amazon Web Services and leverage some of those services directly from AWS. So one of the parts that's really nice about this is if customers are already familiar with Amazon, if they already have instances in Amazon, or maybe they don't want to have to worry about having a very large EC2 instance and they want to take advantage of S3, for example. This can essentially give them that path, give them that avenue to fulfilling these roles that are essentially usually filled by other curl add-ons, directly between Kubernetes and AWS. So that wraps up our alpha and beta features. Lastly, like we had mentioned, I'm just going to give you all some details about joining the replicated beta program. So essentially, it's very easy. You just have to email beta+managers@replicated.com. That's down there at the bottom. Essentially, if you're looking for a comprehensive list, again, this was pretty comprehensive. As y'all can see, there's a lot of features that we covered here today, but there are a few that aren't there. So we're more than happy to share those all with you. But if any of these, or if you just want to get notified about as new beta functionality gets released, you can go ahead and register and we'll reach out and keep you posted. The really important thing about this for a product manager, and just to kind of go to the, some of the comments I said before, is really at the end of the day, the folks that touch and use these new features and components, they really help drive our roadmap and what the future of Replicated is going to look like. So I'm always eager to ping folks in Slack or be able to work with them hand in hand if we hop on a Zoom or things like that to retrieve some of this feedback. So having said that, I'll go ahead and check over in the chat. Although we are starting to run a little bit short in time, we have just about a minute left here. I'm not seeing any questions.
Got a few more minutes. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry.
We have till 5 after, so we've got plenty of time for questions. Actually.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, there's no questions in the chat right now, and we have so few people in this breakout room that we can take ourselves off of mute if you want to ask a question live, or you can post in the chat. Either way.
Yep. And actually, I will mention too, since this is being recorded, for any folks that may be watching the recording, definitely feel free to reach out to that beta+managers@replicated email address, or reach out to my email address directly that we had at the head of the presentation. Kind of living in the moment, was forgetting about the folks that might be watching this on YouTube later.
So what's the timeline, given that some of these may or may not go forward based on interest? What's the timeline for determining whether or not a project will continue on?
Yeah, great question. Oops, and it looks like there was a pop out for closing the breakout room. I will answer that question first, though, so feel free to stick around for the minute or so. Oops, it's going to close in 30 seconds. So really, it depends. Some of these features have been added in the last few weeks. Some others, like the GitOps sealed secrets, for example, have been around for quite some time. So again, we're really kind of focused on adoption, usage, and need and impact to help gate when things are brought to GA adoption. And part of that, again, goes back to that product service area.